Now let's check out a dialogue so that you know how a typical question and answer conversation can go around this topic. So for this particular dialogue, it's about someone's morning routine. And the conversation is between Kwame and Abner. So Kwame starts. He asks, Breben na wote nyane anope biya. Breben na wote nyane anope biya. So we have breben, which we said means what time, literally. Okay. So we have ben, which is the interrogative determiner, what or which, what came before that. So in this case, breben, what time, because bre is time. So we have breben na wote nyane anope biya. We have ta, which I told you we use this to convey often, even though grammatically this is a verb in chi. We said nyane means to wake up, right? So technically this is to wake up, but I told you can also use sorry, which literally means to get up, to rise. But we sometimes use this to also mean to wake up. So brebe na wote nyane anope biya. Anopa is the morning, and we have biya as every. So every morning. When do you often wake up in the morning? When do you usually wake up in the morning? And Abner says, Mete nyane beye nunsia. Mete nyane beye nunsia. So again, you have the ta being used to convey often, right? Mete nyane to wake up. And we say beye is approximately, about, around, nonsia, and nonsia is 6 o'clock. We said this sia comes from insia, which is the number 6, and you have non as the plural of adon, adoma, which is the clock, right? So nonsia is 6 o'clock. So Kwame asks, "Oh sorry, dear na we no kane." Oh sorry, dear na we no kane. So this is the set frame that we talked about in the monologue, right? So we said we use this to convey if or when dash. So if or when clause, this is the marker that we use for that. And I told you the set in front is optional. So we can do away with this as we've done here. And as long as we maintain the at the end, we still have an if or when clause. So, oh sorry, when you get up, when you wake up, Dien na we no kane. Dien we learned in the asking questions lesson, right? That dien means what, but this is a pronoun, unlike the ben, which is a determiner. So this can stand on its own as it's done here. So we are asking about what is it that you do. Kane is first, right? So what you do first. You remember dikain, right? So we talked about dikain. We said dikain means to be first. So you can see this kind here, right? So kane is first in this case. So oh sorry, diena we no kane. When you wake up, when you get up, what is it that you do first? And then Abner says, Midi kain bom paye. Midi kain bom paye. So the dikain is even here. So to be first, right? So midi kain bom paye. Bom paye, we said, means to pray, right? I told you the noun is mpaye, which is prayer. But bom paye means to pray. So midi kain bom paye, I first pray. And then Kwame asks, dien bio. Dien bio. So you have this dien, which is what? The interrogative pronoun, right? And you have bio, which is again. So when you ask this, literally you're asking what's again, okay? What again? So what else? And then Abner responds to that with, me bom paye via, me kochichi me sen, na me jare. Me bom paye via, me kochichi me sen, na me jare. So bom paye, we said, is to pray. And we said we means to finish, to complete, to be done with. But I told you if you bring this we after an action verb, in this case bompaye, which is to pray, you are saying to be done with the action of that verb, okay, the verb that came before. So me bompaye we when I'm done praying, when I finish praying, you have the at the end, which is part of the if or when clause marker, right? I told you when you see this, it means there's an if or when clause, right? So whatever is contained within the set is what is contained within the if or when clause. But I told you can do away with the se, right, in front. And as long as you maintain this one, you still have an if or when clause. So, me bom paye when I'm done praying, me ko chichi me sin. You remember chichi, sin, right? To brush one's teeth. So overall, we have me bom paye when I'm done praying, me ko chichi me sin. I go to brush my teeth, na me jare, and then I bathe. And as she continues, she says, me jare via, me siesie me ho, na me kwa juma. So again, we have jare, to bathe, right? But then there's we at the end, which by itself is to finish or to complete, to be done with. But I told you, if it comes after an action verb, it means to be done with the action of that particular verb. So me jare via when I'm done bathing, because we have the which is the if or when clause marker. So me jare via when I'm done bathing, me siesie me ho. I told you siesie ho means to dress up, so to dress oneself. That is why we have the ho here, the body. So me siesie me ho, I dress up, as in I make myself look good. Na me kwa ejuma, and then I go to work, because we have ko ejuma, to go to work. And then Kwame asks, don't mind the name, okay? The name has switched. So Kwame is now Abena. We ejuma beng. And from our lesson on the self, when we learned to talk about ourselves, we said this is how you ask for someone's profession, what someone does by way of work. What work do you do? So to that, Abena responds, the names have switched. Don't mind me. So we have Abena here. Abena responds to that with meye oyaresafo. Meye oyaresafo. And I told you this is how you tell your profession, right? So you just do meye I am, and then you add your job title to that, right? So if you're a teacher, you say meye ochirechireni. If you're a trader, you say meye dwadini. If you're a farmer, you say meye okieni. If you're a lawyer, you say meye mrenimfo. If you're a journalist, you say meye nsentreni. So on and on. We have a list of some of the professions that we have names to them in Chi on the website, okay? So we have meye oyaresafo. I am a doctor. And then you can also tell where you work. And that is what Abena adds here. She says, meye ejuma wo adenta aban ayaresabia. So ye ejuma means to work, right? So meye ejuma wo, I work at adenta aban ayaresabia. We have aban as the government, right? Aban, the government, and we have ayaresabia as the hospital. So I work at the Adenta Government Hospital. And then to that, Kwame, okay, the names have switched back. So to that, Kwame asks, Ufri fie breben. Ufri fie breben. We said free means to leave, right? And we have fie as the home or the house. So ufri fie, you leave home. Breben, we said breben literally means what time, right? So ufri fie breben, when do you leave home? What time do you leave home for work? And to that, Abena says, me free fie beye nonson. So again, we have free, to leave, and then we have fie, the home, right? Me free fie beye about, around, approximately nonson, 7 o'clock. So we have the son from nson, which is the number 7, and then we have non as the plural of a don. And then Kwame says, Aden, breben na woshe wajumase. Aden, breben na woshe wajumase. So we have Aden. When we learned to ask questions last week, we said Aden is why, right? The question word why. So someone is doing something and you want to find out why the person is doing that, you can ask Aden. Aden. Breben, what time? Literally. When? Na woshe wajumase. She ase or she asie means to start, to begin. And since this is a phrasal verb, whatever you are starting or beginning will come between the words of the phrasal verb. So in this case, it's wajuma. your work. Okay? So, aden, why? Brebe na share what you say. What time do you begin your work? And to that, Abena says, Mejuma sha siye no ngochi. Mejuma sha siye no ngochi. We said sha siye or sha se means to begin, to start. So, Mejuma, my work, sha siye starts no ngochi. 8 o'clock. He said the watching comes from watching, which is the number 8. We aduane ko adwuma. We aduane ko adwuma. So we have ye aduane, which means to prepare food, to make food. So literally we have ye, which means to make or to prepare in this case. And then we have aduane, which is food. So we aduane ko adwuma. Do you prepare food to work? Do you prepare food and take with you to work? And then Abna answers that. So Abna says, Etoda. You remember? So you have Etoda menue diane. Etoda nswa metwe diane wa abonten. So we said etoda means sometimes. Okay, so when you want to say sometimes, you use etoda. Menue diane. Nue diane means to cook. Literally to cook food, right? Because you have ediane as food. And you have noa, which is to cook, right? Etoda nswa, other times too, sometimes too, meto aduane wa abonten. To means to buy. And then we have aduane. Meto aduane, I buy food at, right? Literally. Abonten is outside. So if I say me ekwa abonten, I'm saying I'm going outside. And then Kwame says, the characters have switched again. So Kwame asks, what's in it wapum and sawako ejuma? What's in it wapum and sawako ejuma? So we said tinetine apum means to exercise, right? I told you literally this comes from tine, which means to straighten that has been doubled, tinetine, because you'll not be straightening just one joint, right? I told you apum comes from apomu, which is the joints, literally the insides of the joints, right? So, tenetene apom literally means to be straightening one's joints, exercising. So, what tenetene wapom ansa wako ejuma? We said ansa means before. And I told you can use it with or without na at the end. So, you could say, what tenetene wapom ansa na wako ejuma? Or just, what tenetene wapom ansa wako ejuma? Do you exercise before you go to work? And then Amma responds to that. Amma responds to that with ane. Metenetene mapom beye sima duonu anope bia. Ane. Metenetene mapom beye sima duonu anope bia. So you have ane, which is yes, because this is a yes or no question, right? What's in it in wapom answer? Wako ejuma? Do you exercise before you go to work? And then Abna says, Ane, metenetene mapom beye sima eduno. Yes, I exercise for about, right, around approximately sima eduno. We said sima is minute, right? Minute. And we have eduno, which is the number 20. So sima eduno, anopa bia, anopa is the morning, and you have bia as every. So every morning. Ane metenetene mapom beye sima eduno, anopa bia.